Hello and welcome to Nihal's presentation about the Algerian colonization. First, she's going to give some background information which are very important to understand the context. Then she's going to talk about the process of the colonization and the interaction between France and Algeria. The government and leadership of Algeria are also mentioned. In the end, she's going to explain why she used large language models like me, and of course, there's a quick summary. It's very interesting looking at outlines of Algeria in 1830 and 2024. During Ottoman rule, Algeria was known as the Regency of Algiers or Argence d'Alger in French. This name reflects the administrative structure and political organization established by the Ottomans, with the Bey of Algiers acting as the local ruler but under the suzerainty of the Ottoman Sultan. During that time, it existed a whole another culture. Arabs, Berbers, Jews, Janissaries, Christian slaves, and privateers lived together under the Regency regime, set up by the Ottoman Empire, which enjoyed a golden age of trade and shipping in the 19th century. The Ottoman Empire ceased to control Algeria because France invaded Algeria in 1830 and established the region as a colony after several years of conflict. But why did France want to colonize Algeria that bad? To understand this, we have to look at the purpose of a colonization. Simply, it just refers to the process by which country or group of people establishes control over a territory, often distant from its own borders, with the aim of exploiting its resources, establishing settlements, or asserting political and economic dominance. It's often a violent process. France invaded Algeria in 1830 and took over leadership. Like we all know, Algeria is one of the biggest gas producers worldwide today. Back then, the resources of Algeria was one of the main reasons of why France invaded Algeria. But that's a topic many people argue about because there are many views on why France colonized Algeria. For instance, many say it was just an act to distract the French population from internal political tensions that were happening within France. The others say it was just from hatred or competition with the Ottoman Empire. France used brutal ways to invade Algeria. Radically and without a shred of compassion, the Europeans came into the country and destroyed everything they could get their hands on, except for the resources. The French authorities implemented policies that allowed for the confiscation of Algerian land, particularly in fertile areas. This led to the dispossession of many Algerian farmers and the transfer of land to French settlers. Also, they imposed forced labor, known as corf, on the Algerian population. This involved compulsory work without pay on public infrastructure projects, such as roads and railways. France also destroyed parts of the Sahara while testing nuclear bombs and weapons. Not only had Algeria have to live under very bad conditions, but also experience much discrimination. Algerians had limited access to education, subjected to segregation, and had restricted political rights. This led to social and economic desperation. Some say there was a degree of cooperation since Algerians adopted the language and culture, but did they have another option? We have to consider that France strictly refuses to admit that what they did was a genocide, even though everything speaks in favor of this. We're talking about war criminals that had intentions of ethnic cleansing back then. France would have had so many problems, even today, if there's any form of evidence that France committed these crimes. But I'll talk about it later. So, after the French government decided that the French population had to pay less tax, even though they also lived in Algeria to expand their territory, that's when the FLN was founded and Algeria finally fought back. FLN, also known as Front de Libération Nationale, is an abbreviation for the National Liberation Front. It was a political and military organization formed in 1954 with the goal of liberating Algeria from French colonial rule and establishing an independent Algerian state. This marked the French-Algerian War from 1954 to 1962. It mobilized various segments of Algerian society, including nationalists, intellectuals, workers, and peasants, in a struggle against the French colonial administration. The FLN employed both political and armed resistance tactics to achieve its objectives. Under the leadership of figures like Ahmed Ben Bella, Wari Bamidain, and Abdelaziz Bouteflika, the FLN organized and coordinated guerrilla warfare, bombings, and acts of sabotage against French military and civilian targets. The organization also established a parallel government and social services to demonstrate its ability to govern and provide for the Algerian population. It's called GPRA, Le Gouvernement Provisoire de la République Algérienne, Provisional Government of the Algerian Republic. With the help of Arab League, China, the Soviet Union, and various African and Asian nations, they provided political and material support. So Algeria gained international recognition and support for the Algerian independence movement. But how did it gain that support? The Algerians had much faith and hope with the FLN. They saw it as the only solution for the ending of this madness. With propaganda, demonstrations, engaging in international diplomacy and endurance, they reached their goal, but not just that. They also inspired and motivated countries all over the world. 1962 Algeria was finally free and independent after a long bloody war. Okay, Algeria won. France gave up. What happened after? The struggle for independence from France has left a deep mark on Algerian political identity and nationalism. The memory of the War of Independence is a crucial element of national pride and political rhetoric. Algeria's economy did undergo some changes during colonization, including the introduction of cash crops such as grapes and citrus fruits, as well as the development of infrastructure like railways and ports. Additionally, a small segment of the Algerian population did benefit economically, particularly those who collaborated with the French colonial authorities or were part of the settler community known as the Pieds Noirs. However, these economic advancements were limited and often came at the expense of the majority of Algerians, who faced land expropriation, forced labor, and discriminatory policies under colonial rule. The colonial administration prioritized the interests of France and the French settlers, neglecting investments in education, healthcare, and other essential services for the Algerian population. Furthermore, Algeria's struggle for independence and the subsequent transition to self-rule involved significant sacrifices and challenges. The war for independence resulted in extensive destruction and loss of life, and the newly independent Algeria faced numerous obstacles in rebuilding its economy and society. So there are French characteristics that can still be seen in Algeria even though the revolution has been over for decades. For instance, French remains a significant language in Algeria. It is widely used in business, education, and government. Many Algerians are bilingual, speaking both French and Arabic. Also, Algeria's legal and administrative systems are based on French civil law, a legacy of colonial rule. Many legal practices and terminologies are derived from French law. Major cities such as Algiers, Oran, and Constantine retain the urban planning and architectural styles introduced during the French colonial period. Roads, railways, and other infrastructure initially developed by the French continue to form the backbone of Algeria's transportation network. French cultural influence remains strong, visible in Algerian literature, cinema, music, and fashion. So basically we can determine that French's culture, language, and traditions got stuck with the Algerians since it was too hard for them to change it back to normal. Recently, however, the French language was eliminated in all forms in Algeria, but that's something else. The events that occurred during the Algerian War of Independence are highly contentious and have been the subject of much debate among historians and scholars. While some argue that the actions of the French colonial authorities, including widespread violence, repression, and massacres, constitute genocide, others contend that the situation is more accurately described as a brutal conflict fueled by colonialism, nationalism, and political power struggles. They point to specific incidents such as the massacre of Algerians in Sétif in
The city.
1945.
Some demonstrations included pro-independence elements, resulting in people bearing placards and Algerian flags that were banned at the time. In response, the French gendarmerie, under the order of General Duval, opened fire on protesters, killing thousands of unarmed civilians. What followed were violent clashes between the two groups, as the French armed forces resorted to ground offensives and aerial bombing villages as a means to control the population. The violence continued till May 22, 1945, when many Algerian tribes finally surrendered. 45,000 Algerian men, women, and children had been killed around the region of Sétif, Guelma, and Kharata, compared to only 102 French casualties. The massacre became the impetus behind Algeria's anti-colonial movement that eventually led to the country's War of Independence in 1954. The war would claim a further 1.5 million Algerian lives before independence was finally attained in 1962.
The problem was that France possesses many video material of how they've treated and tortured Algerians. These could prove that France committed many crimes. Since France did not want to get into any problems, they refused that they even have any videos or photos. After that, many presidents, including Emmanuel Macron, spoke up and admitted that what France did was brutal and unacceptable. But what a surprise, Algeria didn't get more than an apology. To have a better overview, I'm going to explain everything real quick. It all began with the Ottoman Empire, when other people lived there and when Algeria wasn't Algeria yet. In 1830, the Ottomans stopped ruling over Algeria because France invaded. Officially, France invaded Algeria because of its resources, but many people argue about that. France was very brutal during colonization, including torture and forced labor. Also, France was known for its ignorance back then, denying the fact that they were war criminals. The FLN was an organization resist against French rule. It was founded in 1954 and marked the French-Algerian War from 1954 to 1962. Thanks to the FLN and the GPRA, also an organization that was founded to provide for the Algerians, Algeria gained its independence in 1962 after a long bloody war with lots of deaths. Algeria today has gained much recognition and is known for its endurance. But still, you can see many French features in Algeria, for example in the language and traditions. Unfortunately, it has not yet been proven that France committed genocide in Algeria.